Today I'm going to be talking about not what I have in books, but what I don't have. Specifically, things that are missing in books. Things that are missing can themselves tell very interesting stories worthy of our attention, our investigation. So this is not the book version of the unexpurgated song with profane lyrics on the radio. This is the expurgated version, safe for kids. I'm going to be using things like excised, defaced, effaced, shredded, bowdlerized. I don't even know if bowdlerized is a common word. Sometimes when you're in a trade or profession, you use words in the trade like they're common English. Bowdlerized means to remove lewd images from a work. It was named after Thomas Bowdler, who in the first quarter of the 1800s came out with an edition of Shakespeare from which he removed all of the lewd passages, an edition primarily aimed at women and children. And he was criticized for it. So I would suggest if you undertake a project like that, don't use Shakespeare. Anyway, let's look at some books, what they're missing and what we can learn about what's missing from them. This first book was printed in 1593 in Venice. It is the historical compendium of the Old and New Testament by the Catholic priest Bartolomeo Dionigi of Fano. This particular copy is pretty much destroyed. Pages have been crudely torn from the book. I like to say excised. But the question is, why were these pages torn and what we can learn about it? The author, Bartolomeo Dionigi, he fervently believed in the legitimacy of translating biblical passages into the vernacular or the common everyday language of the people. This was a tradition that went back into the 1470s in Italy with the famous Mallarmé Bible of Niccolò Mallarmé, the first translation of the Bible into Italian. And that tradition continued up through the 16th century. However, he also believed that he could translate the passages as he interpreted them, as he saw fit, and that did not meet with the pleasure of the authorities. Sure enough, in quick order, the book was placed on the famous Index of Prohibited Books and was banned. There was a particularly fierce enforcement of that in 1596 in Italy with book burnings that targeted these vernacular translations of the Bible, particularly the Mallarmé Bible, but this was also a casualty of that. A Paduan inquisitor of the period, he boasted, how many sacks and sacks of books that he burned. So this particular copy belonged to Elio Vedder from his bookplate. Elio Vedder was an American symbolist, painter, and a book illustrator. He's well known for illustrations for an edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. He was also employed by Tiffany for glass design, and you can see some of his mosaics in the Library of Congress today. He draws attention immediately to a note in a very early hand, probably a 17th century hand on the title page, which says, "Questo libro è proibito," this book is prohibited. And he says in his notes here, he says, "Many pages torn out, seemingly to deface the book, not for the sake of the woodcuts." So sure enough, these pages were likely torn out because of the Index of Prohibited Books banning the work. And sure enough, there's a note at the end of this copy that says also in an early hand to support that, "È stato veduto non è proibito." This has been seen and is not prohibited. So because that's in an early hand, after these passages were torn out, the book was deemed no longer prohibited, and this particular copy could be sold. It's interesting to note that despite the passages being torn out, they did not focus on some of the rather lewd woodcuts. For instance, this is a full frontal depiction of Susanna and the elders here. That woodcut has not been touched itself, but the passage before it has been crudely torn from the book. So from missing pages in a book, we can learn a lot about vernacular translations of the Bible in Italy, as well as the enforcement of the famous index of prohibited books. You don't always need the state or the Inquisition or the authorities to deface a book. Sometimes a book can be defaced for very personal reasons. This is the Historia General del Peru, the General History of Peru by Garcilaso de la Vega. Garcilaso de la Vega was the first recorded mixed-race American, famously the son of a Spanish conquistador and an Inca princess. And he wrote from the Inca perspective. This particular volume addresses the Spanish conquest of Peru, and it was printed in Cordova in 1617. So an extraordinarily important work of American history. It's actually been called one of the truest works printed in America, and one of the few works to capture the soul of a conquered people. So a very important work. Unfortunately, in this copy, half of the title page is missing, and someone in Spain has given some indication that he did not approve of the depiction of the Virgin on the title page. I don't have it here, so I had to look up another copy to see what it looks like. It was relatively easy to find, and it shows the Virgin standing in full glory on top of a snake. That is not an uncommon depiction of the Virgin conquering evil or conquering the devil, but for whatever reason, this did not meet with this owner's approval, and he cut off half of the title page, thereby rendering the book, for me, almost unsaleable, but at least giving some insight into personal religious sensibilities of the period. So half a title page gives a little bit of history about the book. This is a copy, a 1533 copy of Fabians Chronicle. Robert Fabian was a clothier, a draper, a sheriff in England in the period, but he is best known for writing his famous chronicle, one of the earliest English histories of the modern period. It was a parallel history of France and England, and it went from Brutus, the first king of England, up to the death of Henry VII. It was first printed in 1516 by Richard Pinson, but that's an extremely rare edition, largely so because Cardinal Wolsey, the famous Lord Chancellor, decided to burn the book because it detailed a lot of the church's and the clergy's riches. So this particular copy is incomplete. Again, normally incomplete works often have little value despite their age. But this is a particularly interesting incomplete copy. It's missing the first at least 13 pages here, but there must have been incomplete at a very early date because it has a 17th century hand on the first page that remains, where he talks about that very thing with Cardinal Wolsey. He says this chronicle was written by Robert Fabian, but Cardinal Wolsey has caused all copies he met with to be burnt because of church patrimony was too plainly discovered. They did not want you to know how the church got so rich, so they burned all the copies. Why this copy, this was I think 1533 is printed by William Rastell, survived? Perhaps it was because the first pages were missing in the book, so it was not immediately recognizable to the authorities. But certainly it was missing those pages at an early date, and we can only speculate whether they were removed on purpose to hide the book, or whether they just happened to fall out and somebody saved the book anyway in the 17th century. So missing pages, especially with early notes like that, can lead to some very fun speculation about why they went missing. Finally, here's two books, and we get to talk about provenance. Not only provenance, but lost provenance. Everybody loves book plates, signatures, things that talk about the history and ownership of books over the centuries and the things we can learn from that. I also like what I consider lost provenance, and I give an example here. This is Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, the famous Greek history, which was really the first moral and political analysis of war, something we can always use today. This copy was printed in Venice in 1563, and a book plate has been crudely removed. You can see along with some of the marbled end paper here. The question is, why was the book plate removed, or why in general provenance is removed from books? You might have noblemen who are forced to disperse with their libraries for financial reasons, but they do not want to damage the family name, so they remove ownership evidence from books. You sometimes see that even in manuscripts in the 15th century in Italy, where arms have been replaced on the manuscript. You might have stolen books. There's a long history of stolen books. There's even a saying that no good book has not been stolen at least once. And obviously, if you are the thief or the new owner, you do not want evidence of the previous ownership there. Other people take greater pride in the ownership of their work, and they've crossed out previous owners and replaced it with their own, as in this example here. It's been blotted out, and he's written over his name. You also have autograph collectors and book plate collectors over the years that sometimes purposely deface books. You've even had booksellers remove things to make older books look new over the years. This second book is a book printed in Basel in 1561, a copy of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. You can see right here, I'll hold it up to the camera there, it's like a pair of 3D glasses. They've cut out, again, rather crudely, two of the names on the title page. They could have just blotted them out, but they took a knife or scissor to them. Again, we do not know whether that's been an autograph collector or somebody who just wanted to remove evidence of ownership. So I find the lost provenance invites a lot of fun speculation. Very occasionally, when a signature has been blotted out, you can still read it under, but normally we're just left to wonder why the previous ownership's names were removed. I wish somebody would do an exhibition, a catalog on all of the reasons why that is the case. You encounter it a lot in the book world. So those are some examples of things that are missing that invite fun speculation, stories, and history we can learn from what is missing in books. So thank you so much. I hope you will tune in again and subscribe for some more fun facts about the world of antiquarian books.